Okay, we're going to start recording the lecture, so if you miss a lecture, you want to go back and review it. Hopefully that's going to do what I want it to do. If it doesn't, I'll let you know. We'll have to work at getting someone up here who can make it work, but I'm pretty sure I have that down right. Anybody take their quiz yet in here? Okay. I want to encourage you to wait till all the lectures are done. My quizzes are really not easy. They're designed to figure out who the A students are, the B, the C students are. So both lectures are really, really helpful. And they're not always easy. Today I think I'm going to get through only one ethicist, a Greek fellow called Epicurus, but I really need to set a stage so we understand what's being talked about. So most of today's lecture is going to be, I have a few short videos. I want to talk about the concept of happiness, some other principles, and then I'll share the one ethicist with you. That means on Thursday we'll talk about three. I have a fellow named Robert Nozick, I have a fellow named John Stuart Mills, and a lady named Jean Kazaz. They all have different ideas about what happiness means, but I want to set the stage so that we at least are on the same page about why happiness is even important. That being said, any questions for me so far? I realize we're only in a week two. Okay. On Thursday, I went over two principles that we use in Western philosophy that determine how we assess human behavior. We talked about teleology and deontology. Can anyone tell me what, and look, there's no right or wrong answers, people. If you don't get it right, we're just all learning something. It's not like, I look at you any differently than if you get it right. Can anybody tell me what teleology means, how we look at things teleologically? You can look at your notes, it's okay. If you haven't taken your quiz yet. Yes?
I wrote down ends, purposes, and consequences.
Ends, purpose, and consequences. Teleology focuses on the consequence of our action. If the action produces a desired consequence, in general, we say it's a good action. But we also gave examples. Accumulating wealth to live a comfortable life. You can do that through getting a good education. Most people, I don't know anyone who objects to that. For the most part, there was a day when education was not really looked upon as something that was advantageous. Back in the day, we were all on the farm. The lottery, a lot of people play the lottery. It's how school is funded, but some people think gambling is really not what a society wants to be involved in. And then I used robbery as the third example that I would never endorse. But all three of those activities produce the desired result, wealth. So in teleology, we want to look at the consequences of our behavior. But we do have restrictions that we place on consequences. Some things are not allowed. No lying, stealing, cheating, raping, robbing, embezzling money, slander, libel, all those things that we don't agree to. You can't shout fire in a crowded movie theater. But for the most part, we endorse consequences. And I shared with you that for the most part, we are what we call purpose-driven creatures. We do things for reasons. That's what motivates us to take action. How about deontology? Anybody? Go ahead. Moral duty. So I did explain, okay, there was one class I didn't explain what deontos meant. Moral duty. If it's the right thing to do, you do it all the time for the right reason. But there are examples or times when that doesn't work either. Anybody remember the example I gave you? I always use the same example all the time.
Can't swim as far.
Say again?
Can't swim as far. You can't swim as far?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that was another example I gave you, that I'm not obliged to put my life at risk if I don't think I can really accomplish my purpose. And I gave you the idea of firefighters too. If the building's totally consumed, do we really expect them to run into a building when there's no chance of success at all? Now, there's always a risk involved. That's why firefighters run into burning buildings, why police and military run into a fusillade of bullets. There's always risk involved when it comes to deontological behavior. The example I tend to always give in class is what happens when the Nazis come to my door and ask if I'm hiding any Jewish people in the basement. And I am. And the answer is always, in my mind, no. And that's because while don't lie is a very important value, what I call sanctity of life, we'll get into that in the middle of the semester, sanctity of life always outranks everything else. The protection of human life. When possible, sometimes not possible. So those are the two principles that we used. You see these on your quiz. Any questions about them? Okay. For 8,000 years of recorded history, there have been a few select people who select themselves, who have decided that they have the capacity and the right to rule over the rest of us. The kings, queens, Caesars, pharaohs, emperors, and dictators. And they have assumed it's their responsibility, and they always look to some divine source. And I don't want to get into a religious discussion or argument, but they look to a higher power. In the East they do this, and here in the West we do this. For about 4,000 years, there's been a spiritual text that's been used to justify this. It's the Bible. And kings, queens, they all look to it and they say, well, God created us to rule over the world. And that has a name for it. It's called the divine right of kings. That they were given the right to rule over the world. And they've exercised that right. And the reason it works, or it has worked, is because when you can point to an authority as large as a creator, it's hard to argue with that. You really don't want to be against God. Okay? Now, why am I sharing this with you? Because in 1698, this changes because of a man named John Locke. And this will get us into the discussion I want to have with you today about happiness. John Locke's a British philosopher. He's been through war after war in Europe and in England, the British Civil War, the English Civil War. And he wakes up one day and he says, this is all wrong. And he writes a second book. You don't need to know the name of the book. It's called the Second Treatise of Government. And he says, all these leaders, at least in the Western world, who've pointed to the Bible as their source, have misunderstood the text. The text says that all of humanity was given the right to have dominion, not domination, dominion over the world. Now that's in direct opposition to this concept of the divine right of kings. It means we're all on an equal footing. We all should have access to the world. Therefore, Locke invents what's called libertarianism. Embedded in that is the word liberty. It's not liberalism, it's not conservatism, it's not Democrats, it's not Republicans, it's the concept of freedom. And what Locke said is that people have a right to maximum freedom. As long as your freedom doesn't interfere with someone else's exercise of their freedom, you should be allowed to do whatever you want to do. That's generally the concept of libertarianism. The word picture I might have given you, I've given to some other classes, is that I can swing my elbows as much as I want as long as my elbow doesn't in contact with your nose. When it does, I'm infringing on your freedom. So when I lie about you, when I steal, when I rape, when I rob, all those things infringe on your freedom. I can't do those. Other than that, I'm allowed to do whatever I want to do as long as it doesn't infringe with your freedom. As a result of that, Locke says we're no longer owned by the king. We have self-ownership. You're your own person. You have a right, therefore, according to self-interest, things that would promote your life the way you think it ought to be promoted, to do those things, as long as in doing those things they don't interfere with anybody else's freedom to manifest their own self-interest. And of course, therefore, we're free to pursue happiness. Now, this makes it into the declaration I think I shared with you last week: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In the Constitution, it leaves out happiness. It says life, liberty, and property. And when we get later in the semester, I'll explain why Locke said that, but Thomas Jefferson changed it to happiness. This then becomes the foundation of the conversation we're going to have today. It is written in the sacred document, one of them, the Declaration of Independence, that you're endowed by your Creator with certain unalienable rights. That means someone greater than all of us has put in you certain things that you cannot be alienated from, and they're called life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now here's the glitch. I can put you out on a table, I can anesthetize you, I can put you out so you feel no pain, I can open you up and find your heart, your liver, your spleen, your lungs, your diaphragm, all your internal organs. I cannot find your life, I can't find your liberty, and I certainly can't find your pursuit of happiness. But this one concept, libertarianism, has taken such hold. It is the basis of the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution. Everybody wants freedom because everybody for 8,000 years of recorded history has been owned by a select few of people. Kings, queens, Caesars, pharaohs, emperors, and dictators. And suddenly you have freedom. Now, for you, that's just kind of a concept. You were born into freedom. You have no idea what it's like not to own yourself. Well, that's not quite true. African Americans in this country were property. They didn't own themselves. They could be disposed of any way their master wanted them to. Women did not own themselves until 1920 when you got the right to vote. You were your husband's property. Children were the property of their parents, literally could be sold to get out of debt. And even white men could put themselves into indentured service if they were in debt too. They could sell themselves or at least part of their labor to somebody and they would work for them until their debt was paid off. So this whole idea of self-ownership, self-interest, and freedom to pursue your own ends is a brand new concept. People have wanted to embrace it their whole life. And how we work this concept out decides whether or not people feel like they have the capacity to pursue their own happiness. But that begs a question. What is happiness? So, in my class, we do group talk. You don't get extra points for it, but we do group talk. 2 minds are better than 1, 3 are better than 2. So I'm curious, what is happiness, people? Talk to me today. What is happiness? In other words, what would make you happy? Would an A make you happy? Just 2, 3, 4? Okay. But what about that A would make you happy? How would that A make you happy? Say again? GPA, okay. You get a consequence for that. You get a higher grade, and that opens up certain doors for you. Okay. What else about that grade makes you happy or would make you happy? How about working hard? Go ahead.
Maybe like if you got a reward from someone for working hard.
Sure, sure. I like that, working hard. So working hard can be associated with happiness. Okay. What happens when working hard doesn't give us the desired consequence? Are we unhappy or are we still happy? In other words, does working hard, is that a value in and of itself to be sought after?
Does working, you mean like, does working hard make us happy? Sometimes, I suppose sometimes it doesn't. It stresses us out, so that's like, that doesn't make you happy, but at the end, if you get what you want, then it makes you happy, like getting it.
So if you get what you want, working hard makes you happy. What happens when you work hard and don't get what you want? Is there any self-satisfaction in having worked hard? His name was Mike. Go ahead. Well, how do you look at it?
If you look at everything from a positive view, you may not reach your end goal at that point in time, but maybe the positive influence build self-worth for yourself down the line. So before you see that self-worth or the skills that you acquired through that hard work, then there's happiness found in that.
Anybody else agree with that? Go ahead.
I feel like more times than not, if you work hard and you don't get the goal that you wanted, that you're kind of disappointed because you put in all that hard work.
Sure, disappointment's part of hard work too, absolutely. His name was Mike. He was the district manager of Publix. He happened to be located on 19 and 52, and he called me up one day. I put an application in online. He asked me to come in for an interview. Came in for an interview. Hi, my name's Mike. I gave him my name. We sat down. He said, I have one question for you. He said, 17 years without a day off? I said, yeah. I said, if you don't work, you don't eat where I come from. I don't know anyone who wants to pay me not to work. And I had a job, and I also worked for myself. I had a computer business that I ran. He says, never a day off. And I said, I might have to hide out in the back room when I was sick. I mean, I didn't want to pollute you, but if I don't work, I don't get paid for it. I mean, again, I think I might have mentioned this last week, go into Publix and try and walk out with food without paying for it. It just doesn't work real well. It doesn't work anywhere. His next question was, how much do you think my assistant managers get? How many of you work at Publix? I had people in here work for Publix. Okay. He says, how much do you think my assistant managers get? And I said, I don't know. He said, guess. Guess. Did I share this with you last week? I said, I don't know. 50,000? He said, 60,000. And don't go tattling.